Thank you. I hope I last the session. So I'm here to talk about what adults with mild and moderate hearing loss tell us about their experience of that hearing loss. And although I'm a teaching fellow at Aston University, I was very lucky in that I'm doing this work on a secondment at the Nottingham Hearing Biomedical Research Unit, where I'm working with Etna Heffernan, Alex Barker and Mel Ferguson. And what I'm going to talk through today is I'm going to identify why we need to know about the experience of mild and moderate hearing loss. I'm going to describe the research process, present the data we've collected and analysed to date, which is not all of it, and to interpret the findings with respect to clinical practice. Now, we need to know about the experience of mild and moderate hearing loss because some commissioners are currently treating the two categories differently. But research tends to group the categories together in terms of looking at the experience of the loss. So differences in the experience between the two categories of hearing loss might affect our clinical management and possibly funding too. So if we look at people who have mild and who have moderate hearing loss, they clearly suffer psychosocial consequences of their loss in terms of their personal identity, their relationships with friends and family, and there was a nice poster here by Barker et al., who actually looked at the impact on the significant other. It also affects their participation in social activities, their working life, and their mental health, with people in these groups having a higher incidence of depression and anxiety than people with normal hearing. They also have poorer scores on the health-related quality of life measures that we can use when compared to people with normal hearing. It's good to know, however, that people with mild and moderate hearing loss do obtain benefit from hearing aids. And again, another person by Parsons, Mithra and Ferguson showed significant increases in COSI scores post-hearing aid fitting. However, even with those hearing aids, they continue to report hearing difficulties. And often they support their communication by using communication strategies, assistive devices, and modifications within their work environment. There are a number of problems with the existing research. Firstly, there's disagreement on hearing loss categorization, and Kevin Munro touched on this yesterday in his talk about the pure tone audiogram. There's a lot of different definitions, and they vary in terms of the frequencies included and the severity range of the hearing loss. So there's the BSA categorization, the World Health Organization, and the European Working Group on Genetics of Hearing, who have slightly different categorization of severity. There's also the fact that categorization of hearing loss by audiometric severity may be inappropriate, in that the pure tone audiogram does not necessarily reflect hearing difficulty, and people with mild and moderate hearing impairment show improvement in COSI scores 8 weeks after hearing aid fitting. And the interesting thing about that data is that people with mild loss showed more improvement than people with a severe hearing loss. Another problem with the existing research is the differences in technology and research tools used by the different papers that are out there. In terms of hearing aid technology in particular, there's probably going to be some significant difference between papers looking at early stage digital technology versus late stage digital technology, let alone when they're comparing with analog technology. The other thing is that we use a massive variety of patient-reported outcome measures, and that means that results from one paper are very difficult to compare with other papers. In terms of the impact of hearing loss generally, much of the research includes all categories of hearing loss severity, so it's hard to extrapolate out how that applies to people with mild and moderate loss. However, there has recently been a bit more research specifically in terms of mild loss, but that means we don't actually have much data on the experience of moderate hearing loss. And finally, some of the research that's out there is of quite poor quality. For example, where you have case studies, that's quite low on the evidence hierarchy. So, what else do we need to know? Well, we need to know how people experience mild hearing loss and how they experience moderate hearing loss, and how those hearing losses affect their daily life. We also need to look at what coping mechanisms they're using, and in particular, whether the shared experiences of people with mild hearing loss are similar or different to the shared experiences of people with moderate hearing loss. And this project is part of a much larger programme of research that's being carried out at Embrew in terms of the impact of hearing loss. And Etna Heffernan, who's speaking in a different room at this moment, and Alex Barker are looking into the impact of hearing loss. There's also work being done on the efficacy of hearing aids, and David Maidment's work into alternative management options to hearing aids. So this research project doesn't stand on its own. There's a wider programme of research associated with it. So why did we decide to use a qualitative approach? Well, quantitative research into the impacts of mild and moderate hearing loss focuses mainly on patient-reported outcome measures, and in particular questionnaires. And some of those questionnaires have been created without any input from the people with hearing loss. The benefit of qualitative research is that it provides a very deep knowledge about an individual's experience of an event, and in this case, hearing loss. And it uses rigorous and systematic processes for data analysis, which is really important when you're talking about documenting people's experience. The good thing is there is existing qualitative research, but it tends to focus on a particular group. So, for example, Hua et al. Concentrated on the impact of mild and moderate loss in the workplace, or it looks at a particular aspect of the experience. So Etna Heffernan's work looks at the psychosocial implications of those hearing losses. So in terms of our project, we have 24 hearing impaired adults who either have mild or who have moderate hearing loss. And there are 14 women and 10 men in that group, and all participants had hearing aids, although not all of them were wearing them. In terms of the data we had, we used average pure tone thresholds in the better hearing ear to categorise their hearing loss severity using the BSA specification for that. So it's thresholds between 0.25 kilohertz and 4 kilohertz. And we have 12 with mild hearing loss, which means their average hearing threshold in the better ear is between 20 and 40 dBHL, and 12 with moderate hearing loss. For these people, we have audio recordings and transcriptions of individual semi-structured interviews, which were performed using open-ended questions. And we also have the Glasgow Hearing Aid Benefit Profile data. We're using data that was previously collected, and it was collected by Etna Heffernan when she was doing her study on the psychosocial experiences of adults with mild to moderate hearing loss. The primary researcher, that's me, is an audiology clinician, and I bring to this project my experience as a clinician because we want to look at the clinical impact of the experience of this hearing loss. However, that means I also bring some biases with me. So coding the interviews has been completed and will continue to be done blind to their hearing loss severity. So I do not know whether the person whose data I'm coding has a mild hearing loss or a moderate hearing loss. In addition, to make sure that our data has had some rigour applied to it, 3 of my transcripts to date have been independently analysed by my colleague Alex Barker, who's experienced in qualitative analysis, but he's not an audiology clinician. Excuse me. So we've used inductive thematic analysis on the data, and we've used the Braun and Clark approach to thematic analysis because it's a well-recognised, systematic analytical device. And we've also taken what's called a phenomenological standpoint. Don't panic if you don't know what phenomenological means. It basically assumes that people perceive and experience a phenomenon, and in this case it's the hearing loss, in different ways. So for those of you who've never done qualitative analysis, the process is quite straightforward but time-consuming. So we listen to the audio recordings of the interviews so that we get to know the data, and that's known as immersion. We code the interview transcription so that we are identifying key phrases or sentences that represent the individual's views. I'm also writing participant summaries, and that's a 1 to 2 sides of A4, which summarises that particular person's views, general outlook and circumstances. And for me, I've done those 3 processes simultaneously for each participant. I have to say it's quite time-consuming. So far I've done 12 of them, and it's taken me around 12 days to complete that process. So it's not a simple and straightforward process. Once we've actually got our codes, we need to review them to make sure we don't have duplication. And then finally, what we need to do is take those codes and identify themes across the group of people with mild hearing loss and the group of people with moderate hearing loss. And we're looking for experiences that are shared within those individual groups. So we're halfway through. We've coded data from 12 participants, and I asked my colleague Alex to go and have a look at how many had mild and how many had moderate loss. He tells me 8 have mild hearing loss and 4 have moderate hearing loss. We have 4 women and 8 men in the group, and the age range is between 20 and 91 years, but looking at the mean age, they do tend to be older. So in terms of the findings, we have not yet split the participants into their mild or moderate categories. So at this point, I'm unable to answer the project's key questions. So what I wanted to concentrate on today is data including participants with both mild and moderate loss, but I want to look at some themes that are coming out that are clinically relevant and that haven't, as far as I'm aware, been reported in the literature to date. So there are 2 key themes I want to concentrate on. The first one is that it's not all about you, the audiologist. And I want to look at diagnosis and its effect on identity, and something that I've termed the late life crisis. My second theme is that it's not all about the hearing aids either. And I want to talk about communication effort and something that I've called a cost-benefit analysis that people appear to be doing in terms of their daily communication efforts. So let's look at It's Not All About You. It's clear from the data that I've analysed so far that the diagnosis of hearing loss does not happen in a vacuum. And there's quite a lot of interaction with the diagnosis of other health issues. Now, this is true for the younger people in my group as well as for the older people, but it's particularly true of older people because hearing loss combines with other medical conditions to signal to somebody that they are coming to the end of their life. And obviously that can have quite a significant impact. And I've got a quote here that demonstrates that. It makes you suddenly feel very old. And I mean, I'm 65 and I wear glasses for reading and then hearing aids, and you think, oh, what next? A Zimmer frame or a walking stick? In addition to that, there is a deterioration in communication ability associated with these hearing losses, which leads to role changes and reassessment of people's roles in life. And I've got a really good quote for this from one of my participants. So there is a difficult adjustment from when you have your career and having a hearing loss, you don't feel quite on top of it as you were. It requires an adjustment, and you think, perhaps it's because I'm getting older, and then you have to adjust to that. And it's quite clear that a number of the participants actually found themselves, because of their hearing loss, unable to fulfill roles that they had previously been quite competent at. So moving on to my second theme, it's not all about the hearing aids either. I want to talk about the fact there's a continually increased effort in communication over a long period of time, even with hearing aids. And I have to say this ties in really nicely with the talk that was given this morning on fatigue and hearing aid use. It's not just about the listening effort in background noise in groups, and we all know about that in our clinics, and we quite often tell our patients about that in our clinics. There's also the effort associated with continually having to say to people, I have a hearing loss, and interrupting them to ask them to repeat themselves. In particular, it's this regular interrupting of normal conversational structure that can cause quite a burden and embarrassment for some people. And I have a quote here to demonstrate that. You're conscious of the fact you're breaking into the conversation, so you keep quiet and you don't hear what they're saying. There's a second part to this theme, however, and that's effort versus benefit in communication. Now, this affects hearing aid use. Not all of our participants were wearing their hearing aids all the time, and that's because they found the effort of wearing their hearing aids, either in terms of the sound they got through them or actually putting them on in the first place, wasn't worth the benefit they got from those hearing aids in certain situations. It affects their social activities. They actually sit and think, am I going to get enough benefit out of attending that social activity to make it worthwhile the effort that I need to put into that? And unsurprisingly, this appears to be influenced by an individual's priorities and personality. So somebody who has a more sociable nature may well decide that the cost in terms of time and effort is worth the benefit of taking part in a social activity. And a quote to demonstrate that is, you sort of say to yourself, is it important that I need to get involved in this conversation? And you do sometimes adopt an isolationist attitude and say, well, I'm not going to pick up everything that's going on, so why bother? What does this mean for clinical practice? Well, talking about a person's roles in life, their health issues, and their daily effort levels might actually help identify realistic management options for them. And in particular, helping somebody with a mild or moderate hearing loss choose when they use their hearing aids might actually be more productive than insisting the way that they wear them constantly because the evidence shows that increased wear means increased benefit. The other thing that we could do is explain the burden of effort associated with hearing loss, and particularly with communication, so that that can help them prepare to cope with that better. And finally, I think that providing information about supporting options such as communication tactics, assistive devices, the free see-to-hear resources that are available online can help people with mild and moderate hearing loss to improve communication, whether they wear their hearing aids or not. So for this project, we need to complete the data coding and identify the themes relating to the experience, the impact and coping for both mild and moderate hearing loss. And we need to interpret that with respect to clinical practice and hearing loss management. So in summary, the data collected to date suggests that acceptance of mild and moderate hearing loss and hearing aids is affected by other health conditions, and also reassessment of roles in life associated with ageing and deterioration in communication performance. Communication requires effort for people with mild and moderate hearing loss, even with hearing aids. People with mild and moderate hearing loss assess communication situations to determine whether the benefit obtained is worth the effort of the interaction. And further analysis of the data is required to describe the experience of mild and moderate hearing loss. I'd like to say thank you very much, firstly to Mel Ferguson for giving me the opportunity to do this research project on secondment, and also for her support with this project. I'd also like to thank Etna Heffernan, who allowed me to access her data, and Alex Barker, who's given me very valuable guidance on qualitative analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary.